How do they travel? Chair of the Histon Road Local Gazing Forum, and just like tonight's first workshop, on the Histon Road proposal. Just a little bit of housekeeping. We'll just be aware we've been filmed by the council. We've got toilet sound to the left here, and there's a fire alarm. I'm not expecting one, but the blue projector sound on the right the way you came in. As I say, we've got a mixture of representatives. We kind of brought you all forward because we do have a few people who might turn up for, I think, the council meeting. But given the numbers who've turned up, I think 4 tables is probably going to work. So I hope that arrangement is going to be okay. And you should have a list of all the people who will be involved and kind of an idea of the organisation, the representatives from resident associations, schools and so forth that are here tonight. We've got a list of officers as well, those who are presenting a brief presentation, and those who are going to be circulating their expertise and advice during the course of the workshop. And we're going to have Lillian giving a statement on behalf of the Resident Association, Richard Preston, the County Council, Histon Project Officer, give a little bit of context about the city deal. Dan Richardson, City Council Urban Design, giving a brief presentation, and Glenn Histon from WSP about design and then the officers will lead us into the workshop. So, Lillian, will you kick off with your statement?
Yeah, Lillian Rockman from Histon Roads Area Residents Association, and at the LFF Forum, we made the following statement. In accepting co-option onto the Histon Road LLF, the Histon Road Area Residents Association, Benson Area Residents Association, and Windsor Road Residents are not to be taken as endorsing the due maximum on Histon Road proposal and its term, including acceptable bus lanes at the expense of front yards, streets and bridges. The residents' associations are willing to participate to the localizing forum and contribute local knowledge and experience to its workshops on this understanding.
Welcome everybody, thank you very much for sparing some time tonight to come along to the first workshop. Apologies that it's taken some time to pull together the programme for Histon Road. We're lagging a bit behind Milton Road, but we've had some serious venue problems trying to find somewhere to host the event. And apologies that we haven't been able to find a venue that might have been a bit closer to Histon Road, but this is the only available venue we could find that was appropriate to host this series of workshops. I'm going to give a very brief introduction, just doing a bit of scene setting for City Deal. I suspect some of you will know this anyway, so sorry if you've heard it before. And then I'll just go through the agenda for tonight. I think it's important to recognise that your input tonight is on the basis that it's unattributable. We're here to listen to your comments, for you to make whatever comments you think are appropriate to make. Right, City Deal and growth. City Deal is all about the county council, the City Council and South Cambridgeshire District Council working with the government to ensure that we deliver the new homes and the new jobs that are expected to come through in the greater Cambridgeshire area. But the task is to do this in a sustainable way, making sure that we can facilitate all the fringe developments and satellite sites that are coming through the local plan that's expected to be adopted fairly soon. The prediction is that as a result of this growth that travel demand will rise by 30% in 15 years. And the City Deal Executive Board take the view that doing nothing is not a viable option, that if we don't do something, we're not going to have sustainable growth. It either won't happen or it will happen in a way that isn't sustainable for the future. So they are very committed to making sure they address those problems and making sure they get to grips with the congestion and providing the right transport infrastructure to allow that growth to come forward. You may have seen this slide before. It just highlights where we expect those key developments to take place. Some closely associated to Cambridge, other sites slightly further afield. In terms of looking at those strategic issues, the projection is that by 2031, morning peak traffic in Cambridge will increase by 32%. The City Deal programme is very focused on providing much better bus, cycling and walking infrastructure to allow us to achieve as much modal shift away from a dependence on car travel to ensure that we can address that congestion. I think it's recognised at the moment that buses are very unreliable. If we don't do anything, they're going to get even more unreliable. It's also recognised that we need to do an awful lot more to satisfy the pedestrian agenda. Conditions in some areas of the network are pretty poor, and equally in terms of cycling, we've done an awful lot of infrastructure improvements, but there's a huge need for more to follow. In addressing some of those problems, there's also an opportunity to look at some of the other associated issues. And it's well known in many parts of Cambridge that some of the residential areas suffer from through traffic and from commuter parking, and City Deal aims to address that in one shape or another. This is a snapshot from a presentation that was produced when City Deal was looking at congestion, measures to address congestion across the city, and it gives you an indication of the predicted increase in journey times on a range of trips, some of which touch on Wimbledon Road, some of which touch on Histon Road. So that sort of sets out the challenge we've got. The strategy is all about prioritising walking, cycling, public transport, and making sure the right investment is made to deliver the appropriate infrastructure and of a sufficiently high quality. And that will require a lot more road space to be taken away from private vehicles to facilitate those more sustainable modes of transport. Looking at the Histon Road project objectives, you may have seen these before. They're the same set of objectives that we have for Milton Road. And they're very much focused on making sure that we can deliver high quality priority for buses wherever practical and possible in as comprehensive way as we can to make sure we can develop that additional capacity linking some of the development sites and the employment sites in particular. We want to create the potential to increase bus patronage and to generate the right conditions where we can see further investment in additional bus services and to run more services at a higher frequency. Safer and more convenient routes for cycling and walking, segregated wherever practical and possible. I think that's a very important aspect of the scheme to make sure wherever we can that we can get that segregation between walking and cycling. I think that's a particular issue for tonight, given that we're looking at the southern section of Histon Road where space is very constrained. We're looking at, set the target maintaining or perhaps reducing general traffic levels. That's a pretty tough call. But all those transport objectives have got to be balanced to ensure that we are addressing the environment, the streetscape and air quality, to try and blend those to get a reasonable outcome in terms of the final scheme design. The Executive Board met in June when they considered the response to an initial public consultation, and this just highlights some of the key points, some of the key resolutions that the Board made at that time. And they asked that we take forward what's known as the due maximum option for Histon Road, which proposes an inbound bus lane from the north running in as far as Gilbert Road. They've excluded some ideas we had with banning turns, and they've set aside the idea of floating bus stops, although I think potentially that might resurface in one or two areas where we may have more room than we initially thought. It's also asked us to look at two options. One of the key elements of the initial ideas that were put forward were some changes to access arrangements at the Histon Road, Victoria Road, Huntington Road junction. They have some potential benefits, they have some drawbacks as well, and so the Board has suggested that we take forward the design process on the basis that we have those measures incorporated in one design but excluded from another design. And we're looking to develop an outline design that we can then put forward for a second round of public consultation. As part of that, the Board want to ensure that we have a particular focus on landscape areas and tree planting as part of the design process. I think we recognise when you look at Milton Road, sister scheme, there is probably more space there and more opportunities. I think it's a much harder challenge when you look at Histon Road, where space is much more of a premium, and where historically we've never had so much landscaping as perhaps we've had historically on Milton Road. The last key point that emerged from the resolutions was the setting up of a local liaison forum to make sure that local councillors, the local community and key stakeholders play an important role in developing that design. And these workshops are part of that process to ensure that from a local perspective and from some of those key transport groups, they have an opportunity to influence and inform the process at this early stage. I think the expectation is that the local liaison forum will be influential throughout the delivery of the scheme, not only in terms of that initial stage of developing the design, but then if the decision is taken to commit to a scheme, there'll be lots of issues that emerge in terms of actually going out on street and constructing it, and the forum will play an ongoing role in making sure that we get those measures as well refined and publicised as we need to. So looking at the purpose of the workshops, we have these first 4 workshops which are very much focused on design issues. We then move on to the second phase when we'll be looking at some of the key challenges that people want to raise against some of the initial ideas and looking at the potential need for mitigation when we've assessed what the impact of this emerging design might mean. But at this stage, say tonight is all about looking at those broad design issues, looking at the section from Gilbert Road towards Huntington Road, Victoria Road. So we're looking for feedback on, this is your opportunity to make whatever design comments you wish to make, but we're very much looking for comments on how we might introduce landscaping and trees, how we manage the issue of cycle and pedestrian movements in particular. We also want to look at some of the key junctions on that route to get some feedback on some of the initial ideas we put forward. But we also want to reflect on the fact that the Board has made some resolutions. They have endorsed some of the initial ideas at this stage that they expect to be built into the design. I'm sure there are some people here tonight who want to challenge some of those resolutions, but I would emphasise tonight is about contributing in terms of design, not about some of those key challenges you want to raise. You'll have a further opportunity at a later workshop to do that. You've got a copy of the agenda on your table. Tonight we've got some initial presentations looking at an to design and landscaping, then looking at some of the constraints we face when we try to put the design together. We're then going to get into two discussion sessions. The first looking at how we want to apportion the space we've got to develop and design. And then in the second section, we want to look at very much focusing on junction designs in particular. And you may want to make comments on any particular area of the road we're looking at tonight. We've mentioned bus lane lengths. Clearly on tonight's section, we don't have any proposals for bus lanes, and quite frankly, there just isn't enough room. But you may want to make other comments associated with how we manage the design from a bus perspective. And then after those sessions, we're going to ask you to feed back some of your key concerns and ideas. But I'll do a quick intro to both those discussion sessions when we get to that point. So at this point, I'm going to hand over to Glenn Richardson, who's going to give you a feel for some of the approaches that have been adopted in similar situations to the wildlife landscape. Is everybody able to hear what's being said, or do you want us to use the microphone?
So far it's been all right, but I do have a hearing problem, so if people don't speak loudly.
Hello? There we go. Okay, thank you, Richard. Right. Yeah, I'll try almost not to sing as well. So we've sort of gotten into the time of weaving, so I'm going to go quite quickly, and I have to apologise right off the bat to some of you who have heard this before. I've given a version of this presentation to the Assembly and the Board, but also to the Milton Road workshop, or at least one of the workshops. So you may have seen it before, but that's fine. What I am here to do is to give you some ideas and hopefully some inspiration in the art of the possible. What I'm not here to do is say do this and everything will be fine. Okay, I'm not here to preach or push any particular agenda. But I think these are important examples, but also things to remember when we're looking at particularly integrating public transport into street environments. The thing about the street, just as a starting off, is they're kind of this glue that binds cities and places, towns, villages together, and they're crucial, and we have to look after them. In some cases for millennia, when you think about it. So here's an example on the continent in Copenhagen, a street pattern which is still very much there. We have this in Cambridge, we have it in London, we have it in Oxford, we have it all over the place, and it has been adapted, maintained, changed, reused, obviously for different purposes over the centuries, but they're still there and they're persistent. They're really persistent. Newark, you could do the same kind of shot at Cambridge, before and after. Buildings are changed more often, but the space more than not is still the same. This is a really important expression: build streets, not roads, and I'll explain why in a second. If anybody who has either travelled, lived, I've had the good fortune to live in Edinburgh, the consistency of the new town, we're back to the 18th century, fantastic environment, public realm, the streets are still absolutely there, and of course the motor car changed things, but government has somewhat stayed pace with these documents. Manual for Streets 1 and 2 has changed the game quite a bit over particularly the last 10 to 15 years, and looked very much at giving the sort of credence towards people and cycles, etc., rather than necessarily the motor car. This is an important little axis, and I just want to spend a minute with this. A road, an expressway, collector, these kind of engineering terms are very much about getting from A to B, not about necessarily the experience of that journey, whereas a place is very much about these things: avenues, boulevards, streets, lanes. They're really about people, and really where we want to be is on the right side of this graph, is integrating place and street. So if you take anything back from the next 5-10 minutes what I'm going to say, it's probably that graph: streets, not roads. This is a good example of where you can almost be anywhere, but equally it's such a wide, almost windswept avenue that really, it doesn't really knit together people and place, whereas something like this obviously would. I'm clearly not trying to say that, you know, this is what Histon Road or Milton Road or anything will necessarily look like, but it's really about the human scale. Whereas in some cities, of course, you know, it's really hard to navigate to even understand this as a place. It's simply really about asphalt and motor vehicles, and that's not what we want as part of these schemes. Nottingham's got a really interesting scheme. This is called Maid Marian Way, as it was on the left-hand side. And some years ago, they looked to, if you imagine, for example, the Newmarket Road Bridge, just really at the end of East Road, you can imagine something like this happening. And basically removing that subterranean 1960s, 1970s style pedestrian walkway to something where everybody is really at literally and physically the same level, but a much better integrated landscape within that street. Birmingham's been there before, and here's a before, here's an after. I can't remember what part of Birmingham this is. Taunton, obviously in Somerset, good example of where they've integrated a number of good public realm schemes, good high quality pavement and producing really good results. So about streets and allocating space. Upton, Northampton, not that far away. The Homes and Communities Agency built a big chunk of this, well integrated street environment. So lots of good examples, which I'll just kind of burn through quite quickly. The other place, as it were, Oxford, very narrow cycle lanes, but you know they are still there. Somebody said, but they're still there, and you know the trees are generally well integrated. I know cycling officers would say, "Well, hang on, that's a pretty narrow cycle way." Of course it is. Edge Lane in Liverpool, and on we go. The thing about trees is of course, a success like this scheme is based on space, is having space for those things to happen. But there's choices to be made, there's trade-offs to be made, there's space to be found, as it were. But it's all about trade-offs and choices and running through that. But trees can live in harsh environments if they're well planted and they're well, you know, sort of well drained and aerated. Crucially, you know, sort of the exchange of gases between the ground and above. All these kind of things are crucial to the success of trees. And SUDS, which is sustainable urban drainage, within the street environment. So good examples, not that far away. This is not Cambridge, but it's got its own sort of Hobson's conduit, as it were. London, many examples. I appreciate these are highly urbanized, very dense environments, particularly in the city at the scale of London. But Kensington's a really good example of where they've really completely upended the quality of the street to integrate, particularly pedestrians, but also the landscape in there. And it's been, you know, if you've been there, maybe you have a different view. It's perhaps not successful, but they've removed a lot of the sheet pens and a lot of the hard engineering and got a much better result. So plenty of examples. In this case, Malden, London. Here's a good example in Germany, where you've got a really good quality of pavement and a narrowing of the street, which is crucial to driver behavior, because in particular getting speeds down is absolutely crucial to the success of some of these schemes. And less is perhaps better when it comes to detail. So too much signing and lining, that's one of the key things. I can't remember exactly what was the issue here. But again, back to Copenhagen. I'm not suggesting we do Copenhagen, but sometimes doing the best is not necessarily the maximum. Stockholm, very narrow lanes and so on. So lots of examples. You can imagine if you can survive in Rome, then you're doing pretty well, especially as a cyclist. Boundary, maybe a little bit too windswept, this particular shot, but a different way of sharing space as well. This is in Ashford in Kent, so a good example of spent a lot of money on this scheme, the local area, the council, about 10 to 15 million. We've seen this scheme, some liked it, some didn't, but certainly the landscape has changed a lot, again, in Copenhagen. Poynton's an interesting example. This is East Cheshire. And Poynton experienced a huge amount of traffic hammering through the town, particularly HGVs and all sorts of vehicles. And they looked at it together, the council, together with consultants, came up with a scheme which really redressed the balance of vehicles and pedestrians and cyclists. And this is what they came up with, this kind of roundel concept with much tighter geometry to the streets, much better hard landscape on the surface, courtesy crossings, the likes of which are relatively easy to cross, and the like. And they have found through that project that particularly the shops have come back, the economy's improved, and the number of accidents have gone way down. In fact, they're almost to zero in some years. And I'm not saying that's absolutely due to the introduction of kind of a scheme exactly like this. I'm sure there's other factors, but it certainly was a big part of it. Bilbao, going to Spain, of course, lots of international examples, so I'll just kind of buzz through this quite quickly. So in summary, I think the crucial thing really is to take care really to think about mobility along these routes, but also you need to balance it with the human scale, because only then are we going to be able to get a place that people want to be in or moving through with all landscape. I had some slides on landscape, particularly about integrating trees, but one of the crucial, I just want to find one slide particularly on trees. Some of these trees can survive in quite tough environments, as I said. We have Kenny here tonight, who's an ARB officer from the City Council, so Kenny can speak about these things, but you can use structural soil, you can use cells, you can use all sorts of good, clever tricks, providing you integrate them well with utilities, of which there will be some, of course, below ground. But there are ways and means of doing this stuff. It's just, there's a number of choices to be made. So I'm not going to stick around, apologies, but you've got a number of good officers and consultants tonight who can help you through the workshop. And I'll just stop with that and hand over to Glenn.
Hi there. So I'm another Glenn Higgs from WSP Parsons Brinckerhoff. So I'm just going to take you through a few slides to summarise what the key features of the current design are, and just to explain, just put it in context for the subsequent design session, what some of the constraints are. So I think as Richard already said, so just to say we're covering this part here from Victoria Road south to Gilbert Road to the north, so it's about halfway through the route. I won't go through those, but they replicate what Richard was talking about before in terms of the key principles which underpin the current design. So, what we've been working to in order to reduce what's been done to date. So, just running through the route. So, this from apologies, I've got a bit of a cold here, so it comes across. From Victoria Road in the south, so it's not orientated the right way, but we're going northwards. So starting in the south, just picking out a few key features here. So Victoria Road, currently a signalised junction, but what's shown here is the current design, which also retains in a different configuration a signalised junction. And then on the southbound side, on the east side of the road, it's showing a raised cycle lane. So this is just on one side of the road, and it's continuous for that section. On the other side of the road, at the moment, there is quite a long strip of on-street parking, which in order to do the things that we're proposing to do, the suggestion is that needs to be removed. The way the lanes are split, the traffic lanes, it's offset to provide a wider lane on the northbound side, with, as I'll show some examples of typical cross-sections, but with the intention that because you can't provide the equivalent on the other side of the road, where we've got a dedicated, segregated facility for cyclists, it's not ideal, but to provide a bit more width so the drivers can just about take cyclists within that section. And to help provide a bit more awareness to drivers that they're going to kind of cohabit that space with cyclists, it's proposed there are these cycle logos, so symbols, cycle symbols on the road at regular intervals throughout that area. In a few slides' time, I've just shown three typical cross sections through the road, and I've just pointed out as we're going along where those three are. So this is the first one here, looking northbound. So I appreciate this is a little bit small, but it was hard to fit in. So this is the This is the final slide which takes you up to Gilbert Road. So again, going northbound. So we're at the cemetery now. So as with the previous slide, the cycle lane on the eastbound side going southbound continues as a raised cycle lane. And this strip of parking I was referring to extends to the length you can see there. So this is removal of the on-street parking. That same configuration of the cycle lanes, the traffic lanes, the offset, to find a wider lane on the northbound approach continues there, as to the cycle symbols. There's a pedestrian crossing at this location at the moment, that's retained. This is where the next cross section will be. At all side roads, this is a consistent feature throughout the whole route, as is the same with Milton Road actually. So when you get a side road, the intention is to provide a raised entry there. And the idea being that it provides more priority for pedestrians, it's easy to cross the road, it's level with the footway. Provides a bit more, increase the safety for cyclists crossing that junction, because drivers on the approach and on the exit to the side road are more inclined to slow down. So that's for every side road. For each bus stop, now we're not here today, the next session, I think it's in 2 weeks' time, is to talk about some of these specific design features, including the side roads, including the bus stops. But just to provide context, as with side roads, a consistent approach throughout the corridor are to have what are called shared use bus stops, where the cycle lane approaches the bus stop, and then there's an area by the shelter, or if there's not a shelter, just by the bus stop, where cyclists and pedestrians use the same space. So, as with the southern section, the raised cycle lanes continue, but they're also on the other side of the road as well. So at this point, this is where they start, and they're on both sides of the road. There's another cross section there. The existing pedestrian crossing is retained, and then we reach the end of this section of Gilbert Road, where there's a signalised junction, and the intention is to keep that. And this is just to point out a feature about